Confidence comes after action. I think most of us have confidence completely backwards. We tell ourselves, I'll apply when I feel more confident. I'll ask the girl out when I feel more confident. I'll speak up when I feel more confident. I'll go to the gym when I feel like I belong there. I'll start making a video when I feel more comfortable and confident in front of the camera. We think confidence is something we need to find before we act. Like one day we're going to wake up, feel completely certain about ourselves and finally become the person we've been wanting to be. But I don't think confidence works like that. And from my personal experience, it hasn't really worked like that all the time. It's probably like an 80-20 split when it does work like that. And I ultimately think confidence comes, or usually comes, after action, not before it. And I think you act whilst you're uncertain. You survive the discomfort for a little bit, you learn something, you do it again, and slowly your brain starts collecting evidence that maybe you're capable after all. And I think that's confidence. It isn't the absence of fear, it's the evidence that fear doesn't have to stop you from doing that activity or that task that you set yourself out to do. You know, I thought confidence was a personality trait. For a long time, I thought some people were simply confident and other people weren't. And on the surface, I think it can seem that way. You could see it in the way certain people walked into a room, the way they spoke, the way they introduced themselves, the way they seemed comfortable being seen in front of many people in a large group. They appeared to have something that I probably didn't. And because I think they made it look natural, I assumed it was natural. But the older I get and the more experience I get, the more I realize that a lot of confidence is just familiarity. You know, someone who appears confident in a meeting has probably been in 1,000 meetings, and that's just practice. Someone who looks comfortable in the gym probably trained there for years. Someone who speaks naturally on camera or in public speaking has probably done multiple reps in that activity, and they sound more natural and confident. You know, someone who's more comfortable in meeting new people has probably had plenty of awkward conversations along the way. What looks like confidence from the outside is often just experience on the inside. We see the results, we just don't see the repetition that created it. You can't think your way into confidence. And I've definitely tried that before. I'm a bit of an overthinker. If thinking could create confidence, I should be one of the most confident people alive. But it doesn't work like that. I can analyze a situation from every possible angle. You know, what should I say? What could go wrong? How they react? What if I embarrass myself? What if I'm not good enough? And what if I fail in the end? Sometimes we call this preparation, and I definitely call it preparation, but there's a point of diminishing return where thinking stops preparing you and starts trapping you, because you can't reason yourself into believing you're capable of something you've never allowed yourself to experience. You know, you can read about public speaking, you can watch a video about job interviews, you can research a business, you can plan the perfect workout, you can plan the perfect dialogue to ask a girl out. You can do all this preparation, but eventually you have to stand up and speak and do the activity. You have to attend the interview, you have to contact the customer, you have to enter the gym, you have to press record, you have to ask the girl out, you have to have that difficult conversation, or whatever it is. Confidence needs the evidence and the experience for it to be confidence. You know, thinking alone rarely gives you that evidence, but action does. Now, for example, starting this channel is probably one of the clearest examples in my own personal life. You know, when I first thought about making videos, I didn't feel confident, and I probably still don't feel too confident, and you know, I felt awkward and still feel a little awkward talking in front of a camera. You know, I was conscious about my own voice, my expressions, where to look, you know, what to do with my hands is another example, whether whether people would watch the video, whether anyone would care about what I had to say. And, I could have waited until I felt confident in front of the camera. I could have practiced without uploading. But ultimately, how would I feel confident, or how would I become confident in front of the camera, on camera, without ever being on camera? So I think these reps and practice gives you the experience and then gives you the confidence in speaking in front of the camera or whatever activity you decide to do. There was no amount of preparation that could completely remove the discomfort, and I had to record the first video with, whilst feeling a bit uncomfortable. And I think as the videos go on, as more I post, more I create, I feel a little bit more comfortable and confident in speaking in front of the camera. And then the second video, then another video comes, and ultimately I'm still learning, and I'll probably always continue to learn as I upload these videos. They're probably going to be, videos where I ramble, even though I try to structure my videos in a bit of a guided script of these. Probably I will ramble, and probably I'll go a bit off topic, and it's probably not perfect, and that's okay. Videos where I watch them back and question, I made that facial expression, or I maybe rambled too much about that specific area. Maybe some videos I wish I explained things a bit more clearer. But every time I make one, the process becomes slightly more familiar. I understand my voice a little bit better. I become less self-conscious in front of the camera. I feel like the videos become a bit more structured. I feel like I'm a bit more clearer in my speaking. And I start to find my own style and confidence. And the confidence didn't give me the ability to make the videos, but making videos is slowly giving me more confidence in this activity. I think confidence is also built from kept promises. I think confidence is closely connected to trust and your own personal trust, right? Specifically, trust in yourself. Every time you tell yourself you're going to do something and then follow through, you build a little bit more self-trust. You said you would train today, and you trained. You said you would apply for something, you submitted that application. You said you would have the conversation, and you had it. You said you would start, you started. The outcome doesn't even need to be perfect. And, you might have a terrible workout, you might have a terrible job interview. The conversation might be uncomfortable, the first attempt might not ultimately work. But you showed yourself that your word means something to you, and I think that matters. At the same time, the opposite is also true. If you constantly tell yourself, I'll start Monday, I'll do it next week, I'll speak up next time, I'll definitely begin tomorrow, and then you don't, eventually you stop trusting yourself. It's just a lie to yourself. You're not being truthful to yourself. And I think it becomes harder to feel confident because you have created evidence in a negative way that, you won't act when things become uncomfortable. Confidence isn't only about believing that you can succeed. Sometimes it's as simple as believing that you can show up and just try and attempt and give it a crack. My career has shown me this in many ways. And if I look back at my personal career, there were many things I didn't feel completely ready for when I first did them. And a good example is like running my own meeting. I remember the first time I ran my own meeting, whether it was on Teams or in person, I was so nervous, so anxious, so worried. And I remember the feeling of talking in that meeting and hearing my own voice and not actually thinking about what I was doing. And maybe some of you guys know what that feels like. Is sometimes when you get so nervous and you're talking in a public setting, whether it's a big or small group, you start listening to your own voice instead of actually talking and thinking about the next thing to structure it about. And as I did more meetings, I got more comfortable. I got more comfortable with the people. I knew how to structure a meeting. I knew what I wanted to get out of the meeting and led that meeting well. The other side of it, another example in my career is like working with clients and meeting clients in person. Coordinating with technical people or whatever it may be. The first initial instance is terribly uncomfortable because you're nervous, it's something new. Your brain always probably thinks about the worst, and my brain always does as well. And something I always remind myself is the unknown beast or the unknown fear, the unknown monster is always worse than what the reality is. There were many moments where I questioned whether I belonged in the room, and but then the work I did, or the work still had to be done. I still had to get through it. I still had to complete the deadline. I still needed to contact the client. I still, my team needed direction. So I acted, and it's kind of one of those situations where you kind of force yourself in that situation, whether uncomfortable or comfortable, is you just got to do it. I asked the questions, I prepared as much as I could, I made the decisions, I made mistakes, and I learned quickly from them. And over time, things that once made me feel nervous became normal. That doesn't mean I became confident in everything. Put me into a completely new situation and some sort of doubt will ultimately return. But now I have previous experience, I can look back, I've entered some unfamiliar situations before, I've learned before, I've worked things out before, I've been uncomfortable before, but I survived. That is much more useful than trying to convince myself, nothing will go wrong. Probably just expect something to go wrong and go from there. Confidence is usually specific. I think it's also important to understand that confidence isn't one permanent state. You can be confident at work and anxious in relationships. Confident around your friends and uncomfortable at networking events. Confident in the gym and terrified at public speaking. You might be incredibly capable in one part of your life and feel like a complete beginner somewhere else. It doesn't make you fake. It means confidence is often connected to experience. And I think it's almost always connected to experience. Excuse me. When I'm talking about something I understand well, I can speak confidently about it. And I think that's with everyone. Think about a particular hobby, something you're passionate about, something you've done a lot of research about. You can probably answer multiple questions and talk on for ages and have a good yarn with anyone about it. But put me in an environment where I don't understand the rules and I might become a bit quieter, that's normal and that's okay. The goal isn't to become the person who feels confident in every single situation. I don't think that person really exists. I think we're all humans. We always have a ebb and flow and comfortable and discomfortable or uncomfortable positions or situations. And my goal, and hopefully the goal, is to stop interpreting discomfort as proof that you don't belong. Sometimes discomfort just means you're new, you're a beginner, you're a noob, as I'd say. And I think the gym is a perfect example as well. Think about going to the gym for the first time. You walk in, it feels like everybody knows what they're doing except you. You're worried about you'll use the equipment incorrectly. You'll think people are watching you. You don't know where anything is. You feel a bit lost in there. You might spend half the session trying to look busy whilst secretly figuring out how the machine works. I've been there before many, many times, but after you go a few times, something changes, and it's not an on and off switch. It's not a black and white thing or a 1 and 0 where, one day it just completely changes. I think it's a gradual percentage growth in the experience and the confidence you have with that activity. You start to know where the equipment is. You understand your own routine. You recognize some of the people there. You stop thinking about, is everyone watching you? Because you start to realize they're mostly focused on themselves, and that's pretty much everyone in most situations. The building didn't change, the situation didn't really change, but you did. Not because you stood outside giving yourself a motivational speech before you walked in. You walked in enough times that it stopped feeling unfamiliar. Action made the environment safer, And that's what repetition does. Stop trying to feel fearless. I think a lot of people confuse confidence with fearlessness. Oh, hold on, I just lost my notes here. Yes, so they imagine a confident person would walk into a situation with no doubt, no nerves, no concern about failure. And I don't think that's the reality. I think some people can do that in familiar situations, but some of the most confident decisions you ever make might still feel extremely terrifying. You know, you might shake while having that conversation. Your voice might crack during the presentation. You might feel a little nauseous and sick before posting something. You might question yourself right up until the moment you act. And courage and confidence don't always feel impressive from the inside. You know, sometimes they feel like anxiety with a bit of movement. You don't need to remove the fear before you act. You need to stop giving your fear complete control over your decisions. Because every time you act despite of fear or with fear, you teach yourself something important. I think you teach yourself that I can be uncomfortable and still function. I can be nervous and still speak. I can doubt myself and still begin or start the task. And I think that's real confidence. You know, you need smaller wins. Sometimes people try to build confidence by taking on something so large that they completely overwhelm themselves. And I'm very guilty of that. You know, they want to go from never exercising to training 6 days a week, from never posting online to building an entire personal brand, from staying silent in every meeting to becoming the main presenter and the talker or the speaker in that meeting, from having no business to replacing the salary immediately. Then when you can't maintain it, they use that as evidence that they aren't capable. And another great example is the New Year's resolution people going to the gym that probably have never trained for that whole year prior, and then try to go every day in the month of January, and they burn out and it's just too much for them. And I'm not saying that they can't get there, but the goal was too big at the start, and you need to gradually get your small wins in. And I think a better approach is to create smaller pieces of evidence. You know, maybe eye contact and introduce yourself. Ask one question during that meeting, complete one workout, record one video, contact one potential customer. Keep one promise. The action might feel small, but the message you're sending to yourself is significant. I do things even when they make me feel uncomfortable. Once that becomes part of your identity, I think the next action becomes a little easier and a little easier. I also think failure can build confidence too. This might sound strange, but failure can actually make you feel more confident. Definitely not immediately. Failure often feels extremely terrible in the moment, but surviving failure removes some of its mystery. You know, you apply, you don't get selected, no worries. You post something, hardly anyone watches. You attempt a project and it doesn't work. You speak and stumble over your words and you get a bit nervous, a bit of flush and maybe sweat a little bit. But life continues. You're still here, you learn something, you adjust, you realize the outcome you were terrified of wasn't the end of your life. Sometimes confidence doesn't come from always succeeding. You know, it comes from knowing you can recover when you don't. That type of confidence is probably stronger because it isn't dependent on everything going your way. It's not dependent on the outcome, it's dependent on the action. It says that, I hope this works, but I'll be okay if it doesn't. And that's freedom. Another thing is stop borrowing other people's confidence. There's another trap I think we fall into, and I definitely do as well. We compare our beginning with somebody else's middle or end. You watch someone who has been making videos for years and wonder why you don't sound like them. You see someone train at the gym for a decade and why your body, and you start to compare yourself. And this kind of ties into comparison as well. Then you use their confidence as evidence of your inadequacy, and but like you're looking at two different stages of people's life, and it's easy to say don't compare yourself, and naturally we do. You know, the better comparison is with the version of yourself who hadn't started to their version who 10 years ago who hadn't started in that particular task, and you're probably in the same spot. And I think you should look at yourself as, tying up with the point previously, as small goals and small improvements. You know, are you slightly more capable than you were yesterday or a month ago or a week ago? Is that task or activity becoming easier? Have you learned something? Are you recovering more quickly from your mistakes? That is progress. And I think confidence grows quietly in the background or on the inside. You might not notice it day by day, but I think one day you'll find yourself doing something naturally that you used to be absolutely terrified about. Act like the person you want to become. There's a phrase there's a phrase out there that people often use. Fake it until you make it. And I understand the idea, but I don't think you need a fake confidence. You can be honest. You can say, oh, I'm a little nervous, I'm new to this, I'm still learning. I think that's a great, honest way to do it, because a lot of people are probably too focused on themselves and probably respect the honesty. You know, if you're just doing a first meeting with someone or it's a new task, hey, this is my first meeting, a little nervous, still trying to learn my way through it. Usually people are quite graceful with it and want to help you out and help you figure it out. But the important thing is that you still act on it. You know, maybe it's less about pretending to be confident, but more about behaving like a person you want to become. You know, what would the more confident version of you today look like? They might still feel a bit nervous. They might, continue to ask questions. They might still set boundaries, and you want that confident person to still act and submit that application, run that meeting, talk to the client, walk into the room, go to the gym, press record, whatever that task is. You don't need to become that person all at once. You just need to practice being them through your decisions. And I think your identity and confidence follows with those evidence too. Every action becomes a vote for the person you're trying to become. What actions are you currently avoiding? So maybe the question isn't, how do I become more confident? Maybe the question is, what action am I avoiding because I don't feel confident? That's usually where your answer is. Maybe you need to speak to someone, try something new, put your work in front of people, ask for the opportunity, return to the gym, apply for the role, start something new. You don't need to tackle every single insecurity at once, but choose one action, something slightly uncomfortable but still realistic. Then just do it. Not to prove that you're fearless, not to guarantee success, but to give yourself a new piece of evidence for confidence. I don't think confidence is something you either have or don't have. I think it's something we build through experience, repetition, mistakes, keeping promises to yourself. Through doing that and through doing things badly in a way, or failing early, failing quick before you learn how to do them well. And most importantly, through acting before you feel completely certain. So through acting before you feel completely certain, so you stop waiting to become confident enough to begin. Begin and give your confidence a chance to catch up. You're going to feel nervous, you're going to have a bit of doubt, you're going to have a bit of fear, but do it anyways.